Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Insight APSAD webinar. My name is Michelle Taylor. I'm one of the clinical educators at Insight, and I will be your host for today's webinar, delivered by Jaime O'Donovan and Kate Jacka, titled, How Do We Transform Lives? Co-creation, clinical case management, and multi-systemic practice. So as we hear from Jaime and Kate, I will be monitoring the chat for your questions and comments. So please put them in there, and we aim to have time to put these to Jaime and Kate at the end for their responses. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where you are attending from and viewing from, and where I am coming to you from. For me, it's Meanjin, Brisbane, the home of the Turrbal and Yagara Nations peoples. So we wish to pay our respect to the traditional custodians of the lands wherever it is you're joining from, to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to any First Nations peoples who are joining us today. So today you're going to hear from Jaime and Kate, and it's my pleasure to just give you a little taste of what they're about to talk about. I'm really looking forward to hearing more. So we have this from them to introduce us into the space. What if you had the time, resources and flexibility to deliver great work? We will explore the co-creation of the Transform Lives program, utilising clinical case management to support mothers in prison and their family system to lead safe, fulfilling and dignified lives. In this presentation, we will discuss how the model systemically addresses the barriers mothers face across service systems, including AOD, by utilising integrative and collaborative practice. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Jaime and Kate. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to have to play around with making sure that I can get to the next slides. There we go. We also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today. And for me, that's the Yagara and Turrbal people. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today. Sovereignty was never ceded. This country always was and always will be the land of First Nations people. We also just wanted to acknowledge the artwork that you'll see in our presentation today. It was designed by Elaine Chambers-Hegarty from Cultural Edge Design, and it really incorporates who we are as a program and that transformation. We also wanted to acknowledge that First Nations people face massive overrepresentation in all systems of social control, with being imprisoned at the highest rate of any people in the world. First Nations women make up the fastest growing prison population in our country. And, there we go. And the enduring impact of intergenerational trauma from colonisation continues to profoundly affect the well-being of First Nation people and their communities. And we understand the importance of upholding culturally safe practices in all of our engagement with First Nations women and children. And we also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of the men, women, children, and gender diverse people who are in prison today, and the intense pain and trauma that incarceration causes to each of the over 40,000 people and children who are currently incarcerated in Australia at this very moment. And I extend this acknowledgement to their families and loved ones. So we are going to talk about the Transform Lives program, but we just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what it looks like for women in prison in Australia today. And it's pretty dire. This information was taken from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare in 2020. So some of these numbers may be a little bit different, particularly in relation to homelessness, given what's happened over the last 4 years in terms of the housing crisis and COVID. But it is quite significant. So over 80% of women who are in custody in Queensland have experienced violence. And from our experience working with women, it's really significant high-risk violence. 72% of women have been in prison prior to their current incarceration, and over 60% have mental health problems. I think the big one, seeing as this is AOD specific as well, is 74% of women in prison have used illicit drugs in the 12 months prior to imprisonment, with a substantial use of methamphetamine. And I think all of us listening in today know the significant impact that that can have on so many different aspects of a woman and her family's life. So we just wanted to acknowledge that there are significant challenges for women who are in prison. And when we think about what transformation may look like for women and for mothers, it isn't just them as an individual, it's about a complex ecological system. And this system can support women, but it can also really challenge women and mothers as an individual, but as a family, as a community. And there's so many policies and systems and legislation that are really intertwined in their lives and can support and challenge them in very different ways. Okay, next slide. So who is the Transforming Corrections to Transform Lives Centre, and who is the Transform Lives program? The program sits within the Transforming Corrections to Transform Lives Centre, which we'll refer to as TCTL. And we will discuss briefly the different, I guess, wheels within that centre. But what we really wanted to acknowledge was that this program was truly co-created by mothers who are in, or who were in prison. And how that was done was researchers from the Criminology Institute at Griffith University went into all the women's prisons in Queensland over quite a long period of time and did extensive workshops with mothers around what they felt they needed to thrive in community, to remain safe and stable, and to build connection with their families and their children. There was workshops also done with all the stakeholders that work with women and mothers in prison during custody and after release. And the researchers took all of this information and put a program together, and then went back to the mothers in prison to ask them if they got it right. Is this what you feel like you need to thrive? What supports do you need to thrive and to be safe and stable in community? And that's how the program became about. TCTL is around how do we create conditions for families to thrive through holistic systems of practice. But it's also about how do we build effective and sustainable service provision that can be scaled up by government in different settings and for different population groups. This brochure, which I'm not sure if it's easy to see online, but it's on our websites, was really developed out of the information that was gathered in the workshops. And it outlines the worries and needs that mothers and women had through their journey in the prison system. So it looked at their first few days in prison, while they were in prison, and that journey to release from prison. And the primary concern that came up constantly for women and mothers was, what about their children? How are their children coping? What's their children's well-being? Where are their children? And also the access to supports and services to assist them to thrive, to be a great parent, and to remain out of prison. Women really identified that they wanted to heal and that they wanted support to be able to heal as well. So there are some other posters that are on the website, and also acknowledging that all of this was made available to the women in prison as well. So they were given all of these flyers and all of the information that they shared within the workshops, just to be really transparent and open with them. So this is a really complex slide, but it really provides an overview of who we are as a centre and as a program, and all the different wheels within our own system of the centre. And we will be touching on all aspects and all cogs of the wheel within the program because it all contributes to developing an evidence base to create change for women, not only at the front line, but also at a broader systemic level. So we have three main sections. That bottom section is around research and evaluation, and it really sits behind everything that we do within the centre, because it's about developing that evidence base for women and children that can be used by government to go, well, what is and isn't working? It looks at how the program was implemented. It looks at what has worked well, what hasn't worked well. Is it more effective than business as usual? And what are the longer term impacts for women and children? It looks at the individual change, but also group change and long-term change. So it's really, it's co-created, but it's also being properly evaluated as well to see how we can be better. The Transforming Corrections Hub, or the Transforming Corrections Hub, which is the green teal circle, looks at the systems that impact on women and children. And it really looks at some of the government systems, legislation, policies that impact on information sharing and decision making at a broader level, but also on the front line through a community of practice. And Kate's going to go into more detail a little bit more about that and how we use it to create change for the women and children that we're working with. But the section that Kate and I are really involved in is the circle, the pink circle there, which is the Transforming Lives program. Right, next slide. So the vision of the centre and the program is around supporting women and mothers to have safe, dignified and fulfilling lives. We're about breaking down intergenerational cycles of disadvantage and incarceration. But by doing that, we're transforming systems and generating new knowledge for evidence-based programs and different ways of doing. So this is just a small, I guess, picture of who we are that's easy to see and understand. So I guess, who are we as a program and what services do we provide? Okay. Ooh. Yep. So the program is based in Southeast Queensland and in Townsville. So we're replicated in both sites. We have a program manager in each site, which is Kate and I. And then we have 4 program coaches, and in both sites, 2 of those program coaches are First Nations women. And we all have a really broad range of knowledge and skills that we bring to the table. No one coach is the same, which is great because we share that knowledge across the team and share that knowledge with the women and children that we're working with. We then have a program assistant who really supports us to implement the program. And then we have a program assistant position that is a paid placement position. So the centre's all around breaking down disadvantage and challenging systems that cause disadvantage. And we know so many students out there doing social work and human services have to do lengthy placements, and so many are disadvantaged and can't complete their degrees because placements go for 18 weeks and are unpaid. So we want to create a space where students can complete their degree and contribute to the workforce. So it's really exciting that we have that space and that opportunity. So I'm just going to, in the workshops, the women really identified that they didn't want a case manager. They didn't want to be seen to, they've got too many case managers in their lives with child safety, with QCS, with probation, parole. So they really wanted someone to support them along their journey. And as we're working with children as well, we thought, I guess the terminology coach came up because children can really identify with who a coach is, like with footy coach or a netball coach, that we're really there to provide support and to nurture women and children. So in order for us to be able to provide intensive case management and provide the support that women identified they needed, we are so fortunate that we have really small caseloads to be able to do that intensive case management. So each program coach works with 4 families per year. And although that may seem really small, and it is, we work with anyone that mum identifies as an important person in her life. So that could include children under the age of 18. It could include adult children, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, ex-partners, anyone who mum identifies as an important person in their life. Because we know that there's so many systems in place, and that's informal support and systems as well can really influence both positively and negatively on outcomes for women and children. So we work with women who are incarcerated, who are sentenced. So we tend not to work with women who are on remand because we do want to work with women up to 3 to 6 months prior to release, but we are a super flexible service. So there can be some movement there. Because we're a trial program, we don't have a way to refer in. We obtain data from QCS and case managers and then talk to the women who meet the criteria. They need to be at moderate to high risk of reoffending and live within that Southeast Queensland or Townsville region. We can't work with women who have committed sexual offences against a child or committed a crime against a child in general while we're in this trial phase. And we are unable to work with women who are in protection in the prison system at this stage. And we don't work with women who are going to be released to their home country upon release. So that's sort of roughly who we are and how we bring women into the program. But we didn't want to spend too much time on that because there's so much that we wanted to talk about. So the program is really designed into 5 core phases, and this is the wheel of the program. So the broad goals of the program is really around how do children and mothers succeed and be supported to succeed. And we really do this by providing an innovative and intensive family system approach to support. So as I said, low caseloads, really specific intake pathways, and really flexible and holistic approaches that meet the family's need. So it's not a tick box service. We don't have a one way is the same way for everyone. It's a really unique way of working to meet the unique needs of every individual. So as I said, we work with women during their incarceration period, and we want to work with them 3 to 6 months prior to release to really build trust and build a strong therapeutic relationship, because evidence shows that women don't tend to engage post-release if they don't feel like they've got a trusting and supported relationship with their worker. So many women have told me, and it's in the research, that they have such a distrust for services because services have let them down in the past. They've said they're going to do something, but it hasn't been followed through. So we really acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do to build that trust and build that therapeutic relationship with women. And we have this, I guess, mantra within our program is that we will follow through with what we say we're going to do. If we don't have an answer by a certain time frame that we've identified, we'll go tell the woman that, and we'll tell her what our next plan of attack is. So it's about following through with what we say we're going to follow through with. And it also really gives us that time to build relationships with children and community as well. So immediately upon release is when we probably do the most intensive work with women. For some women, they have so many services that they need to link in with on day of release, including probation and parole, Centrelink, housing. And it is so overwhelming as a worker to have to manage all of that. So you can't even begin to imagine what it's like for someone coming out of prison to have to link in with all of these services. As we saw earlier, the situation's so dire for women. So many don't have safe and stable accommodation to go to on release, and they're released into homelessness. So it's like, how do we support women immediately upon release to be as safe as possible so we can start working towards their other goals for them to be able to thrive and be stable? We really support women to achieve their goals that they've identified and not necessarily the goals that have been set by other organisations such as child safety or corrections. So often the goals are all the same, but services are working in silo and they're not talking to each other. So part of our role is to bring all those organisations together so everyone is sharing information with consent, but also not requesting the mum to have to do all of these specific actions by one service and then all these other specific actions by another service, which is just impossible to achieve. So we really, within service delivery up to 3 years post-release, and we are funded till 2027. So at this stage, this is when we're working with women till. We want to build the mother's capacity so they can be their own advocate. So we walk alongside women, really empowering them to be their advocate. But our hope is that towards the end of that 3 years, they're leading the way and we're walking behind them. We have a 24/7 service as well, where we offer support for crisis. So talking like high risk of DV, police presenting to the house, other crises where mothers are potentially feeling really overwhelmed and just need some support. And that's really great because there's not a lot of services out there at the moment that have 24/7 support. And then another part of who we are is that research and evaluation that I touched on earlier, because so many of the research measures that we're using are used to help with case planning and goal setting. And Kate's going to show how some of those measures are actually used in practice to identify women's goals and support. I also just wanted to acknowledge, which I should have acknowledged earlier on, the program is funded by the Paul Ramsay Foundation. So we aren't government funded. We work out of Griffith Uni, but yeah, we're funded by the Paul Ramsay Foundation until 2027. So currently, what does our work look like and who do we support? Currently, we have 17 women and their families within the program, and every single woman that we're working with has experienced adverse childhood experiences. And we know, and like everyone listening in today would know, adverse childhood experiences can have such significant impacts on young people as a child, but well into adulthood. And for some people, their whole lives. It can impact on their health and well-being, their physical health, their mental health. And we are hoping with this program, breaking down some of those intergenerational trauma. Hopefully kids aren't going to be as exposed to some of the ACEs that have occurred in the past. All the women we're working with have experienced significant high-risk domestic and family violence. All have had child safety involvement either as an adult or as a child. And alongside that, all have had mental health concerns. But the biggest one is that all the women we're working with have experienced substance misuse. And for most of the women we're working with, so much of that substance misuse is related to coping with their trauma. They haven't had access to supports and services to really support them to address the trauma that they've experienced to no fault of their own. And substance misuse is their only way of being able to currently cope with that trauma. A lot of the women as well are being coerced into using substances by partners who are perpetrating violence. And that's something that we have to be really mindful of in all the work that we're doing. Every one of the women that we are working with have experienced system barriers and communication breakdowns through government organisations, non-government organisations, with family, informal and formal supports. So it's around how do we have better communication as stakeholders? How do we address the system barriers that women are experiencing to create a pathway for change and to create a pathway for better outcomes? I'm going to hand over to Kate now, who's really going to talk about the specifics of what we're doing and put it to a case study, acknowledging that we're not going to give specific information, and it is a combination of lots of different things we're hearing from women, because we do have small caseloads and we don't want to compromise confidentiality for anyone that we're working with.
Thanks, Jamie. Jamie's also going to help me coordinate slides because I'm technologically challenged. I wanted to acknowledge the land on which I'm sitting up here today. So I'm up in the north, so I wanted to acknowledge the Bindal and the Wulkurukaba people and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded, so it always was, always will be. I also wanted to kind of touch on what Jamie said about the you know, the current stats and information about the overrepresentation of First Nations women in our prison. So in our prison up here, in Townsville Women's Prison, which is the only women's prison outside of the southeast corner, we have approximately, as of September, about 260 women sitting in that centre, and over 82% of those women identify as First Nations women. And that is definitely not in line with our population. And so it's definitely a representation of intergenerational trauma and the impact of colonisation and the massive amount of work that we have to do, which I'm sure you all understand. So as Jamie said, I'm talking a little bit more about the practice and digging into that a little bit more deeply. I wanted to acknowledge the Paul Ramsay Foundation as well, because I think that when I heard about this program, I felt like it was a little bit of a utopia. Like, how can you actually only have one woman at a time come into your caseload, and how can you only have 4 women in a year? Like, it just seems, yeah, it seems so odd. But we genuinely are supported because of the evidence and the research work that was done by the Griffith team and by the women inside, to see if this practice that we've all talked about many, many times, I'm sure, over the years, if you've been in this space for a little while, what could we do if we actually had the resources and the time and the capacity to support families holistically, but intensively, you know? So this slide is a little bit of a unpacking and digging into what we actually do. So Jamie talked about 4 coaches and a program manager doing this work in each trial site. So we're guided kind of in these 3, I guess, focus areas. So the program is all about goal setting, and that's what makes it so individualized for the women and the children and the family, because every single woman, child, family is very different. And so it's guided by their goals and their experiences. Depending on the situation, sometimes that means that the children on the outside will have their own case plans and their own goals. There might be some overarching family goals, because we will provide that kind of family systemic approach. But then there will also be goals that mum is working on while she's inside, and then that will also transition out, of course, because of that ongoing long-term 2 to 3 year process, if that's what the family would like to engage for. The assertive case management, we really feel like, and Jamie touched on it as well, that being assertive and action focused rather than reaction focused is a really privileged place to be. And because we do have the capacity of a low caseload, we should really honour that. And so we try to be very assertive, very strengths focused. If we experience a barrier or a blockage, we use the levers and the supports within the program to navigate around that, and the relationships and all those kind of functions to navigate those systems and ensure that women aren't experiencing extra disadvantage due to bureaucratic systems issues, you know. That also means that we will coordinate, refer, monitor, you know, kind of agitate those systems so that things are working. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will do everything if we're not needed, but we will touch all those services and systems and make sure that they're moving and working. Things like making sure an FGM is happening for a woman and her children, and there's a current case plan and things like that. And we unpack that a little bit more later. And then the third kind of component of the program is the clinical interventions. So some of the coaches have clinical backgrounds and are able to provide direct clinical therapy. And if a coach doesn't have that necessary skill set or qualification, then we're able to co-work within the team and provide that service if the woman and or children would require that. So that means direct therapy while mum's inside, and or direct therapy and support with the children outside. Might be delivering clinical programs and things like that as well. So the flexibility and the ability to do all of that in the one program is really exciting. So a multi-systemic approach is really, really key to the TLP, or the Transform Lives program. So since the beginning, and since talking with the women inside who have experienced multi-systemic barriers for much of their life, it was a given that the program operates from this approach and functions in this way. And I guess multi-systemic practice or multi-systemic therapy has a lot of different approaches and a different kind of frameworks, and there's even some specific programs that you can buy and deliver. And I guess for us, it's more of a framework that sits above and at the foundation of our program. So for us, our multi-systemic practice means that we acknowledge that there's multiple interacting systems that exist within and around the people that we work with, including the family system at the core of each woman we support. But then as you get wider and wider outside of that, and so we really focus on the person not being the problem, and seeing every woman and her family as part of this multi-systemic ecological system, and us being the support mechanism to support her to navigate that and make sure all those systems are kind of working and supporting her needs. And also acknowledging that all these systems in our service sector exist to benefit women, children, and people we support. But as we all know, unintentionally, often those systems become complex and create barriers that Jaime kind of touched on before as well. So our approach, how we actually do that, like in action, what that means, there's lots of words, but that means we're really flexible, we're really intensive, we're holistic, we will move and shift and jump across different systems depending on what the family wants. If there's some support and advocacy needed with education, we can go there. If there's NDIS applications that are needed, we can go there. If there's rehab and AOD things that a woman might need that we wouldn't be able to provide, we'll navigate and kind of try and support her to access those things and make sure they're meeting her needs, and that they're linked and coordinated with all the other things that are around her and her children. And often the huge barrier of being in prison is that there's a huge information gap, that women are often, their words are, they are often forgotten. Can't get an email, can't get a phone call easily, all those things. So they just, there's huge gaps in quite simple systemic linkages and ways we can work to support them to keep that connection, and for that experience not to be another extremely traumatic experience. The practice or the approach also means that we work with the entire family, like Jaime mentioned, whoever mum identifies as the family on the outside, and we start doing this work while she's still inside. Some of those basic foundational linkages of communication and visits, which you wouldn't think would be so difficult, but they often are for people who are experiencing disadvantage because they don't have transport and they don't have the capacity to fill out the lots of forms that QCS like and all those things. But it also means linking information sharing amongst the systems that might be around the family on the outside. Sometimes it means that the kids are starting to become involved with YJ or are already involved with child safety, and sometimes siblings are separated and all those things, and without mum and potentially without dad, or with complexity going on and dads and other family members unable to coordinate all of that, we often find that having that really open, flexible, systemic approach is really useful for the families that we start to walk alongside. It also means that while we're touching and supporting those systems to work better for that woman and family, we're often coming across barriers and blockages. And like Jaime mentioned, the program was developed to have levers within the program, such as the systems change board work and some of the work, or the concept of the work of the communities of practice. So whilst this multi-systemic practice in action happens in our direct work, we also feel like it's really important in our kind of indirect work, in that sector development and that systems change space, which we'll talk a little bit about next as well. So next up, I'm going to talk to you about Samantha. And like Jamie said, Samantha, her name has been changed. That's not her real name. And some details have been changed so that there's no identifiable features for Samantha. So the what you can see on the slide as well is based on our life event calendars. So our life event calendars are a tool that we use when we're working with women to start mapping out their journeys and their lives. And it's both a clinical tool and a research measure. And the women have found it really, really valuable and empowering to be able to tell their story. And often the feedback is that they've never had an opportunity to lay out their experiences and their kind of life in that way. So it's been a really interesting tool to use across both the research and evaluation of the program, but also in our clinical work and our support for her and the development of her case plan and things like that. So Samantha is a 32-year-old Wulkurukaba woman who's been imprisoned 4 times since she was 18. So you can see down the bottom there's a little kind of age tracker, and you can see the times when she's been arrested, and they represent her experiences of imprisonment. She has 2 children and is currently pregnant with her 3rd, but this is her 8th pregnancy. Sam's 2 living children are under short-term guardianship orders with child safety in 2 different placements. A 15-year-old daughter is placed with a maternal aunt and a 12-year-old boy with a non-First Nations foster carer. Samantha has experienced significant domestic and family violence and sexual violence from both fathers of her children, and that contributed to her incarcerations and the child safety involvement and subsequent removals of the children from both parents. Both fathers of her children have also experienced incarceration, and multiple of her charges have been cross-order DVOs and breaches of those DVOs, and have been related to some coercive control outcomes from those relationships as well. Samantha was a child in care herself, experiencing significant domestic and family violence and substance misuse in her own family of origin. Samantha struggles with the impact of her traumatic experiences and has never had access to clinical or intensive family supports before. She cites that's mainly because of her ongoing interactions with the justice system and her prison, her time in prison, because often women will enter prison on remand, and particularly First Nations women won't be supported for bail, or will be homeless, or will have other challenges, and so won't receive bail from a court. They'll enter prison on remand and therefore often not really be eligible for many programs. And then by the time their matters are heard in court, they're released with time served. And so often there's a significant gap when women are incarcerated that they're not actually able to access services and supports. So Samantha has been incarcerated for 6 months at the moment and has not seen her children during that time at all. This is obviously causing some ongoing and significant trauma, and she's beginning to even have what potentially some of the staff within the centre would call behaviours because of her significant distress at not being able to see her kids or have regular contact. She's liaised with child safety for the last 6 months to try and get her youngest child brought in for play groups and to get regular contact, even video link phone calls, and that is yet to occur. She talks about CSOs consistently changing and her limited time on the phone, not being able to access a child safety officer with the information she needs. Samantha is very concerned about her upcoming release in 3 months' time, as she has nowhere to live, no ID and no transport. And due to her pregnancy, she'll potentially have a newborn baby as well. Samantha became involved in TLP because she wants this time to be different. She wants to never come back to this place and build a stable and safe home for her and her babies. On engagement with the Transform Lives program, we start working with Samantha inside And these are some of the examples. It's not all of the things that we would do with Samantha, but these are some of the things that I thought might kind of give a little bit of a taste of the program. So we've arranged regular visits with both children. Within a few weeks, we've been able to coordinate that, as well as simultaneous visits within the correctional centre. So one of the big gaps for women in prison is that they never get to see their kids together. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you haven't seen your children in the same room, or the children haven't seen each other in the same room for 6 to 12 months, that is a huge, huge thing for a family to be able to experience, and so important in their healing and their connection. So we're able to do that. We're able to provide 10 sessions of direct therapy for Samantha, which focused on emotional regulation, psychoeducation, and building her resilience to tolerate her current environment, and those feelings of stress and the trauma related to all her experiences. The coaches were able to deliver 6 sessions of Shark Cage, which is a domestic and family violence psychoed program, because Samantha identified that she really wanted to work on not going back to unhealthy relationships and building her skills around what is a healthy relationship and how do I maintain that when I get outside. We've connected with foster carers, child safety, and ensured that family group meetings were held and that case plans were updated and or developed if they hadn't been. We've liaised with the oldest child's school and connected mum with updates from school, including report cards and things like that she'd never received before. The school also was having some disengagement challenges with the young person, and so we became a member of the stakeholder meetings at school and supported child safety to reinvigorate them and make sure that they were happening, to prevent that ongoing further disengagement from school for her 15-year-old daughter. And we also were able to start one-on-one support with the 15-year-old daughter as well. We updated housing applications and advocated for joint action plans with child safety for appropriate housing to work towards reunification, or even for there to be a possibility for that to happen. All of that is done pre-release. And so then on release, we're able to provide Samantha with daily support. So that can look like 8 to 10 hours a day. So our coach is with that woman. We pick her up on the day of release, and she has lots of things she has to do most of the time, including probation and parole or community corrections, Centrelink, doctors, child safety meetings, housing meetings, all sorts of things. It's a very busy time. And without transport and without secure and stable housing, it is almost unfathomable as for someone to actually be able to do all those things and stay in line with those sometimes really strict requirements that have been put down on them by the parole board or other kind of legislative bodies. So being able to do that really foundational transport, daily support, connection, and planning is key in those first few days. We're also able to connect mum back to family, culture and country, making sure that we're really culturally safe and that those plans for those first couple of weeks were included whatever was needed culturally, and if there was a need to connect to country, that was included in the planning. We have brokerage. So as a program, we support with emergency brokerage and kind of crisis support, but we also have a development fund and a clinical support fund as well. So we're kind of well resourced in that space to be flexible. We also work with every service and support and local food bank and donation service, like the wonderful people at DV Safe Phones and Thread Together and things like that. So when she gets out, she has a brand new wardrobe and shoes and things like that, that might seem minimal, but they are a really, really significant thing for a woman to start to kind of shed some of that stigma and the trauma of being incarcerated, and to see herself moving forward from that. Child safety advocacy is also something that we hit the ground with within those first few days, making sure that we've got coordination around contact or FGMs or whatever happens, whatever's needed. Medical and health follow-ups. Often there is a need to get in within a GP within the first few days of release. And then housing advocacy and coordination as well. Like we talked about, housing is a significant issue at the moment for everybody. Everybody knows that. I don't need to talk about that anymore, but we will often work with the local IHR funded services to try and coordinate crisis and temporary accommodation, particularly in regional areas, and up here we don't have much emergency accommodation at all. So there's lots of hotel and crisis and caravan park accommodations and things like that. So that has its another layer of challenges and difficulty, particularly if women have requirements for community corrections like ankle monitors and things like that. So coordinating and supporting a woman with all of those things amongst the first few weeks of release requires lots of support. We're able to do that. So in that process, and you guys can all see Samantha's experience, you can imagine how difficult that would have been for her on release. And so we just kind of put together, I guess, those systemic barriers that all the women that we've supported faced. And these are the main ones. And we've got child safety, so the lack of access and connection to children, housing, AOD services. So a lot of women really, really want to go to rehab on release, and they feel like to a residential rehab prior to going back to community would be really, really healing and really, really important for them in that journey. And often it is impossible to do. There's lots of rehabs that won't take women straight from prison. And so there's lots of vulnerability and risk in those weeks post release. So we really try and hold that space as well. And then mental health. So a specific, I guess, systemic barrier is that lack of access to mental health in general while people are incarcerated. So women aren't eligible for a mental health care plan. So even if we could get, say, a private psychologist to come into a prison, the woman isn't eligible for a mental health care plan, and the clinicians within a prison don't provide clinical support. Therapeutically, they provide clinical assessments and risk assessment support. So it's a systemic barrier that doesn't, I guess, support the needs of women, and to reduce that recidivism, I guess, and to kind of, support that process. So when we talk about these systemic barriers, and already, even though we only have 17 women in the program, we're already seeing the same things that the women are experiencing across all of those women. And it's also the same things that the women told us in the workshop they were experiencing. So it all aligns, and it's all probably, I would imagine, what everybody watching this webinar also experiences as systemic barriers. And so I guess the beauty of this program was that it was identified that the direct support was needed, right? So women did need this model of service, is what they said they needed. So we're giving it a go and seeing if it works. But we also needed to address those systemic barriers. We needed to transform the systems, we needed to approach that, I guess, that process of transformation collaboratively and with that systemic approach of no blame, but a collective responsibility to come together and go, we all know these things aren't working. It's not a fault of anybody. It's a wicked problem. So let's address that systemically. And the work of our TCTL Centre centred around bringing together a systems change board as part of the systems hub work, because we said we can do all this stuff on the ground, we can develop sector development within a community of practice, and we can upskill the people in the front line and on the ground. But if we don't have the decision makers at the table, and we don't have that support and those relationships, then we'll be forever challenged, And it gives us a lever as well. It gives us a pathway to escalate up, and it gives them a pathway to escalate down. And so that systems change board is a group of wonderful, committed, kind of assistant DG level, commissioner type level representatives from all these government departments that you see on the slide. And sometimes they change, so we haven't named them. And we also have the Honourable Margaret McMurdy as the chair of the Systems Change Board. And that kind of also represents the close links of our program and TCTL to the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force, and the integral work of reports like Hear Her Voice and things like that. And so our program was actually named in some of the recommendations from that work in regards to some of the work that QCS and other government departments could do moving forward to improve the experience of women in the justice or incarceration system, but also, I guess, as a lever to reduce recidivism and reduce that and increase a trauma-informed practice approach in those systems. Because so many, almost all of the women in these systems have experienced significant domestic and family violence and gendered violence. So that links us to the communities of practice. So the communities of practice, I guess you could say, kind of sit, if the systems change board sits above, they kind of sit below as the sector development arm of the program, in a sense of bringing together the frontline workers and leaders in the space of working with women and families who have experienced incarceration or who are moving through the prison and justice systems, who want to transform those systems and who want to build and improve on integrated service responses and have really strong connections and networks and make sure we're accessing all the available professional development and really building those connections and collaboration so that we can safely and with consent share information and wrap around women and families so no one falls through the cracks. And so like most communities of practice, they're founded around terms of references and all those things. And in the 2 trial sites, they've begun in the last kind of few months and have really developed by the services and the systems that have joined those communities of practice. They centre around that collective responsibility, I guess, to do better and to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to improve the lives of the women and the family that we support, and also being open to how, I guess, we can further integrate and collaborate with wider systems. Because even though there's always that core group of services and providers that might be working in a prison or with women in community who've just come out of prison, we know that these women are touching child safety, mental health, education, and all of those systems are a part of improving her and the children's experience and reducing that risk of recidivism so that we don't see this revolving door again and again. And so yeah, I think that's probably about it, about the communities of practice and our work. So we're up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate and Jamie, for a wonderful overview of the Transform Lives program. And congratulations to you and all your team and all those involved and all those women and families whose lives sound like they are being transformed on so many levels. We have a couple of questions and I'll put those to you. Someone has asked, if a woman does reoffend, are they able to remain in the program until legal processes are completed, or are they discharged?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't see faces, so I can't see anyone. Kate, if you're going to answer that. Yes, we still will work with them. We won't close cases if women reoffend. If they get a lengthy sentence, the intensivity may reduce, but we won't close anyone from the books if they are back in prison.
Great, thank you. And you sort of responded to this, someone asking about, someone's got a diagnosed mental health, they've got a diagnosis or they're on a forensic order. It sounds like, from what you've explained, there are certainly people like that who are part of your program.
Yeah, I don't think it wouldn't exclude
Sorry,
it wouldn't exclude access to the program. It's more determined around the child's consent or the carer of the child's consent. So as long as the child or children, we only need one child, consents and wants to be involved in the program, then yeah, mum's mental health or even the child's mental health is not relevant. Really happy to work in that space, and sometimes there's much more need in that space. So we probably should be in there.
Great, thank you. And someone else, well, there's plenty of people saying, you know, wonderful program. So wonderful you're doing this for these women. Great presentation. So I wanted to let you know that if you can't see all of those comments. But someone else has asked about the future and what time, you know, at what time points you'll be giving us updates and telling us about the program's progress and what the future looks like in this space.
You want me to answer, Kate?
Yeah, you go that one.
So regular reports and I guess research articles will be written by the researchers, and they will all be uploaded onto the website. But we're all about sharing information and sharing wins and sharing things that we're being challenged by, because that can only support other organisations who may be experiencing similar things. I know in the community of practice and the networks, we will be sharing a lot of our journey and what that looks like and the outcomes and things like that. So people are really welcome to be a part of that and to email us if they want to be a part of the community of practice. But definitely we'll be sharing the wins and the challenges and updates on how we're going with the program on a regular basis. I guess some of that will come from the centre director, Susan Dennison, and through the researchers. So I'm not exactly sure on the specifics of all of that, but if you keep an eye out on the website or reach out to us if you ever want any updates, we'd be really happy to share them.
Great. Thank you. That sounds wonderful, all of that. Someone said too that they're really interested in the model you showed of the integrated service provision, and wondered, do you think this model could be adapted for different groups, such as those with coexisting disorders, for example?
Yeah, I think so, and I think we didn't delve super deep into the research and evaluation, but that's because we're not the experts. We have this wonderful research team and the amazing Susan who leads all that stuff, and that's a whole nother hour of information. But I think that's the concept in a sense of the level of research and evaluation that we're undertaking and all the tools that we're using, the research measures with the women, is to really I guess unpack how the kind of support works, who it works for, when it works, when it doesn't work, and even cost out that effectiveness. So costing, say, comparing the cost of imprisonment for someone versus if that person doesn't reoffend for 12 months, what does that actually cost benefit? You know, what's the cost benefit to the community or the sector, and therefore kind of justifying this level of investment for future. And so the concept of the centre isn't just about, I guess, that research and evaluation promoting this program to be hopefully funded into the future if it works, but it's also about creating a research evidence base for the sector to support what intensive evidence-based wraparound supports can do for people, but also can do for, I guess, the wider sector and society and the cost effectiveness of that as well. So absolutely. And I think we're already working with many people with coexisting disorders, depending on what exactly you mean by that, but that's kind of that flexibility of the program as well. And yeah, lots of people kind of talk about how well it might work with other groups of people.
Yeah, and we could see that from your presentation. Yes, that you were finding ways to bring together and approach all of those ranging needs that people have. Look, we are out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you again. There's lots of appreciation for your presentation, and people are saying they've learned a great deal. I know I will be heading to your website, and I look forward to seeing that brochure as well. There's some wonderful things there that you're able to share with all of us to support our practice and the way we think about how we work here and transform people's lives. So thank you very much, Jaime and Kate and your teams.